afternoon. It is the Sunday before Christmas, and as you can see, it's very un-Christmassy around here. Actually, that's not true. There is a Christmas tree over there, but you can't see it because it's off shot. So, one more day, Christmas Eve, and then it's Christmas. Hey! So, I hope you're all going to have a very nice Christmas. So, last week I did a piece about caveat emptor by Beware, and I've had another reason why I just sort of reiterate on caveat emptor, because I know of somebody else who has recently bought a piece of equipment with warranty off of eBay and now tried to return it to the manufacturer and is having all kinds of problems trying to return the equipment to the manufacturer because they don't have proof of purchase. So while the manufacturer says yes, it's definitely theirs, unless my friend can prove he purchased it, and an eBay receipt is not proof of purchase because the person he bought it off of is not a registered dealer. The warranty is invalid, and it's a very sticky piece of law. Anyway, just recap on caveat emptor because we went over it last week. There you go, there's another prime example of caveat emptor, buyer beware. I've had buyer beware all the time anyway, if you've got your head screwed on. Anyway, this week I'm going to talk about this thing, and I'll tell you the reason why I'm going to talk about this thing. So this is a Muse Receptor, okay, and this happens to be a Receptor 2, and the latest version of the thing was this thing here, which was a Receptor Quadro. Now they made these things in several different guises, so I think they started with the original Receptor, then there was the 2, then there was the Trio, then there's the Quattro, and each one slowly got a little bit more powerful. So first of all, does anyone know what a Muse Receptor is? Or I suspect many people do not know what one of these things is. So first of all, what is it? What does it do? Well, that's a bit of an interesting conundrum because the Receptor is a plug-in player. What do I mean by a plug-in player? So most of you used to using VSTs with your doors. Well, this is what this thing was designed to do. This thing here was designed to play VST plugins. Okay, that's its sole purpose. It did not have a sampler, it did not have a sequencer, it wasn't a workstation like this beastie behind me. It was purely there to play or host VSTs. And I would almost go to say it was like, where was we used to say that sort of keyboards were romplers. This is a Vospulator, something like that. But you get the drift. So effectively what you would do is you would buy your VST from your favourite VST retailer, and this thing had a partnership with Native Instruments, so it had a lot of Native Instruments pieces, but other VSTs were available. That's what it was designed to do. It was designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to play VSTs. So effectively what you would have is you would have your keyboard player playing on stage. This thing would sit in the background. You would set it up with your patch lists, and effectively you would just kick your patch pedal on the stage, or however you've decided to change your patches, pedals, iPads, whatever it happens to be. And this thing would then just flip through to the next patch, and it would automatically be set up for you. You see, a lot of these things were used with another program called MainStage, if anyone's ever knows of MainStage, but that's sort of was a common pairing. Now, the reason why I'm pulling this thing up and saying, well, I'm going to talk about this, apart from the fact I actually think when it was back at the 2, it came in green and gold and electric blue like that, which was actually quite cool. The reason I bring this up is because for one reason or another I ended up on the Muse Research website a couple of days ago, only to find that Muse Research had gone bust, which I thought was an incredible shame, because I think the idea of this thing is actually really, really quite good. But what is this thing and what does it do? So I haven't got a picture of the insides of this, but just like this beastie behind me, effectively what this item was a computer in a box. So it had a motherboard. If you open the box up, you would see a hard drive, you would see a motherboard, you would see possibly an Intel chip or an AMD chip, but you would see that inside. So what you would expect to see in a sort of run-of-the-mill PC, you'd see inside this thing. Then there was a custom I/O interface. So there would be in the later versions, the I/O interface was actually to use a PreSonus device and connect directly to that. So it had drivers specifically to run this PreSonus device. And then it had a human interface, which was this thing here on the front of it, where you press the buttons there and you went straight to the patches you wanted. Okay. When you were back in the studio mode, you would have to sit and set this up with another computer. You didn't log on to this thing. It wasn't like a USB plug-in and then you would configure it. Actually, what you had to do was almost like in the computing world, where you do a remote terminal session. You'd have to do the same thing here. So you would bring your computer up, and then you would effectively bring the screen of the Muse up, so you can configure it. It's pretty difficult to explain unless you're sort of in that industry, but effectively it was a computer. So that's it. That's what this thing was. It was a computer. And the interesting thing, I've got some notes here because I've wanted to make sure I got this right before I get shot down by people people going, "Ah, I got this wrong." So a lot of people say this thing was a Linux machine. So I've said before, this beastie behind me is the Korg Oasis. Right? If you don't know what this is a Korg Oasis, and this is probably one of the most powerful things I've ever played with. It really is. In terms of how it functions, okay? And they took all this logic and everything they learned in the Oasis and they moved it into the Kronos, which I also have, as you probably well know if you watch the channel. And what I tend to do is I have the Oasis here at home, and the Korg Kronos is actually in the studio. So I get the best of both worlds, and I can actually move things from one to the other in a sort of roundabout way. But I tend to use this for thinking and that for playing, if that makes sense. So again, what I'm saying is this is a Unix computer. The Kronos is a Unix or Linux, which is a sort of flavour of Unix computer, with very specific input-output devices on it. So in this case, it's got a touch screen and it's got a keyboard as its input devices, and then it's got a sound generating digital audio interface on the flip side of it to actually generate the sounds and send them out to the amplifier. Right, that's what this is. It's designed to run as a keyboard. It's designed to make sounds. It doesn't have all the guff that Microsoft put in their products. Hence the reason why it's a Linux machine. Linux machine is a very, very slim kernel, which is sort of the operating system, how it works. Okay, so it doesn't take up a huge amount of processor, it doesn't take up a huge amount of disk, but it's there to do one thing. It's there to play music. Or in this case, act as a workstation. So that's what the Muse, and a lot of people, when you go on the internet, a lot of people will turn around and say the Receptor was a Linux machine. Wrong. The Receptor was actually much, much cleverer than that. So yes, the basic motherboard configuration was that of a Linux machine. However, the Receptor used something called an operating system called Wine. Okay, and people will say, what does Wine stand for? Well, it's actually Windows Interface is what the WI stands for, but what the NE, I'm not sure if I'm brutally honest, because I've seen several interpretations of what the NE stands for. But what effectively that was Wine was a project that was started by two Sun engineers, so Sun Corporation, which has been consumed into Oracle now. But the Sun Corporation, when they had their Solaris workstations and their Spark workstations, Solaris OS, they were looking for a way to be able to port Windows programs from the Windows environment into the Sun environment. And why would you want to do that? Well, you would want to do that because there's lots of Microsoft PCs out there and lots of people write programs for them. not very many people write programs for the Unix-based PCs, and the problem you had with Unix was that there were lots of flavours of Unix. Okay, and now there's quite a number of flavours of Linux. So you've got Red Hat Linux, which is what actually this thing is based on, is a Red Hat variant. Then you have something called SUS Linux, and in the Unix you had loads of flavours of UX. You had things like IBM had a flavour called AIX, Sun had a flavour called Solaris, HP had a flavour called HP UX. You know, the list goes on. Depending on who the manufacturer was, they wrote a specific version of Unix to meet their hardware standards, which was all very good, but if you're trying to port programs from one to the other, not everything will run without some sort of interpretation going on. Anyway, history lesson of Unix over. This thing had this operating system called Wine on it, okay? And what Wine was doing effectively was it was trying to wrap the Windows API and all the sort of cool stuff that makes Windows work into a sort of single kernel layer that then would run super fast on a Linux machine. Okay, that's sort of where this thing was going. And of course, you know, the guys at Muse Research who built the Receptor, they wrote their own, well, took the open source version of Wine and they tweaked it for how they wanted the Receptor work. Great stuff. And it started to get a lot of traction in the industry. But the traction in the industry was in the pro area. So you tended to find a lot of stage and orchestration guys who were going out on tour were taking these boxes because they could orchestrate everything up in the studio, stick it all on VSTs, write the have the patch sequences programmed into the Receptor, get on stage, and then your artists like Billy Joel or whoever it happened to be would sit out there and they would just basically kick the pedal and bang, and the next song will be there ready for them. And you didn't have to worry too much about it. And where it came to my attention was, and I can't think of the guy's name at the moment, but the stage director for Billy Joel was where I saw it originally. Well, I think he had 2 of these for Billy and 2 of these for himself, and he was a redundancy freak. But the whole idea was if everything went down, the show would still go on, and that's what the beauty of the Receptor was. You turned up, you plugged it in, you plugged in a MIDI cable, you plugged in a controller keyboard, and you switched it on, and it just worked. Okay. As I said, a brilliant idea. However, all brilliant ideas have problems. So this thing, when it was brand new, or when the last version of this, apparently it would take 16 VST, so you could run 16 VSTs generating sounds, okay, separately, and 57 VST effect processing units. So you could really go to town on your sound, much the same way as you do when you plug VSTs into your DAW. The difference is, of course, you're not running a DAW on this machine. You're just literally running the VSTs in their rawest form. And that's probably where this thing came unstuck. So, going back, how much did these things cost? Well, I costed one of these up when I was going to play in a band a few years back, and I didn't really fancy carting the Kronos and everything around with me. I thought about this as a possible solution, and I costed up one for me, which was a Receptor Trio with SSD hard drives in it, and the costs came back about $3,500, because you can't buy these things in the UK, of course. Came back about $3,500 plus shipping and taxes. Okay, so that was a pretty basic version, but it would have done for what I was going to use it for. Now, if I went and looked at the components in the box that I was getting, so you know what CPU, what RAM, hard drive, and all that sort of stuff, I could have built that machine for under $1,000. Okay, so there was a differential automatically there of $2,500. That's the IP you're paying for. You're paying for their IP is $2,500 effectively. But these things, you know, they went up, you know, up to about $5,000 or $6,000. You could if you really stack this thing up with all the RAM, as much RAM as it could take, etc., etc., you're up to about $5,000. Was the hardware worth it? No, it wasn't. Was it worth it for the interfaces? Questionable in my mind. But as I said, it's a solution that works. So you could take a keyboard with you that had all the sounds loaded on it, and a receptor with all the sounds loaded on it. And if the receptor went wrong, you just go back to the keyboard. Job done. But it was expensive. It was expensive hardware, and hence the reason why it was pretty much aimed at the pro market. So the pro musician, and that is one of the reasons why I think this company went bust. Because they weren't aiming it at the semi-pro musician, they weren't aiming it at the amateur musician. And if you think about, a pyramidal structure, as we all are, there's only a few guys and girls at the top of their game, at the top of that pyramid. And then as you come down to all us folk who do this as a laugh or do this in a semi-pro way. If you're not aiming at the bulk of the population, you're only aiming at the top 10% of the population, you're slowly going to have a problem because your business model is not flexible, it's not expandable. Whether it would have been in the future, we don't know because they've gone bust. But back in the day, possibly. That was one of the issues. That was one issue where I think this company failed. I think the second reason why this company failed is the Wine operating system. And I have to be honest and say, I come from a technical background. I work in the computer industry. And what they were trying to do with Wine was pretty spectacular, okay, in terms of how the whole thing was meant to work. The problem is, if you go and ask any manufacturer, how much does it cost to maintain an operating system, they are going to tell you that they would prefer to buy an operating system rather than effectively write their own. Hence the reason why the whole world has gone Microsoft. All right, it's far cheaper to go and buy a copy of Microsoft, load it onto your machine, than it is to go and try and write your own. It becomes a very expensive business. Not only is it expensive to write the software, to write the operating system in the first place, because you've got to write the operating system, you've got to write all the drivers for all the devices, hard drives, input-output devices, interfaces with RAM, you name it, you've got to write a driver for it. So you've got to do all that stuff. You've got to make the thing stable so it doesn't blue screen all the time. I mean, those of us who have been in the industry long enough, in the computer industry long enough, know everything about NT4 and blue screen to death. It was just sort of like, back in those days, it was just it's gone blue screen, oh dear, it's all gone wrong. But that was a genuine issue. Okay, so you've got that sort of side of it, which is, how do you make something that actually works? And then the problem is you've then got to keep up with the changes in technology. So as somebody releases a brand new chip for your chipset, or like a brand new processor, or you want to put a brand new hard drive, you want to go from a spinning hard drive to a solid state hard drive, you've still got to write all the drivers for that. So there's a hell of a maintenance task going, and every time you release a new one of these, so you've gone from your Receptor 2 to your Receptor Quad, right? That would have a different driver set to that. So it becomes very expensive. And that's where I think the real problem with Muse Research has come from, is trying to maintain the operating system for all these devices that they were selling. So and this is it sort of gets me on to sort of where this Rant is going really, in that I own this, right? I think this is an absolute fabulous machine. There weren't that many of these produced, okay? But if you've ever had a go on an Oasis or a Kronos, believe you me, these things are epic. They really are epic. They do lots of things, and I know I've got loads of keyboards for different things, but to be honest, I could probably do everything on the here, right, that I ever needed to do. Right, it is such an epic machine. Would I travel with it? No, because I couldn't get bloody spares for it. Right, so that's a limitation. The other thing is, this thing was the last operating system for this thing was 2009. Okay, after which Korg have moved on. Right, much the same as Roland and the Jupiter 80, they've moved on. Right. What I'm trying to get at is there must be a way that these manufacturers would release the source code for these things. I mean, at the end of the day, this thing, the reason why this came into being, if you like, the name Oasis stands for Open Architecture Synthesis Studio. The whole idea was it was meant so that you could actually write sound plugins, write sequencer plugins, write extensions to the operating system. That was the whole idea behind this. Unfortunately, it failed. Okay, that was a problem, and it failed because nobody outside the Korg family really got to grips with this. It probably has something to do with the fact that brand new one of these things was $9,000. Okay, which was a hell of a lot of money. 10, 15 years ago. I mean, it's a hell of a lot of money now, but 10, 15 years ago, $9,000 for a keyboard was a lot of money. So again, where are you aiming this at? You're not aiming this at your amateur, your semi-pro, you're aiming this at your professional. With the Kronos, however, the top of the range Kronos was only £3,000, let's say $4,000. I don't know how that roughly translates, so if I got that slightly wrong to people in America, I do apologise, but the top of the range over here was around about £3,000. There is a marketable difference between the top of the range this and the top of the range Kronos. Okay, much they've got the price point much closer to what the semi-professional musician can afford. Much wider market, and it probably explains why the Kronos came onto the scene in 2011, I think it was, and he's still going, and they're still updating the operating system, and they're still supporting it. But what we need is people to come in and start supporting, these legacy machines. Whether it be an open source community, I don't know. I am not a computer programmer. I don't never maintain to be a computer programmer, and when it comes to running Linux, it's not my field of expertise. I mean, I know how to navigate through a Linux machine, but in terms of actually starting to program machine code on a Linux machine, that's not me. I wish it was, because I'd love to take ownership of the source code of this and expand it for the Oasis community, but I can't. And it comes back to this: who is going to take ownership of the operating system of one of these things? Because I think this was a fab idea. I really think this was a fab idea. I think it was ahead of its time, and I think its price point was way too expensive for what it is. But somebody needs to, all those people who've been out and bought these things, and there are lots of people who've been out and bought these things, have now got effectively a doorstop. It will carry on working. Yes, it will carry on working. But you won't be able to load new VSTs onto it, because apparently, even though Native Instruments were sort of one of the key supporters of this platform, in order to get VSTs onto this, quite often you ended up on the phone to Muse Research support, because even though the Wine interface was there to host it, you had to tweak it to get your VST in to run on it. Okay, it wasn't as straightforward as a Windows machine or a Mac, where you sort of bang the VST into your DAW, tell the DAW where it is, and you're ready to go. This wasn't like that. You ended up quite often spending quite a long time on the phone, apparently, to Muse Research, asking them what you needed to tweak to make that VST run. So there you go. That was the rant for this week, which is all about legacy support. I'm going to keep on banging about legacy support whenever I sort of get the chance to do it, because I think it's something that's very important, and I think it's something that the industry completely misses. You issue a keyboard, you make it software driven, and then all of a sudden drop support for the software. I'm sorry, that is just not on. But as long as they're allowed to get away with it, they will continue to do that. On a sour note, I might add, on a happier note, it is Christmas. I do wish everybody a very, very Merry Christmas, and I will see you, the next one of these is scheduled between Christmas and New Year. So I will see you then.
Sayonara for now. Bye-bye. So this is the point in the video where I turn around to you, my viewer, and say, if you enjoyed the content of this video, please give it a thumbs up. The way the Google and YouTube analytic engines work is that the more likes you get against a video, the more it gets promoted by YouTube and Google, and therefore more people with the similar interests to what you have and I have get to see this content. This channel is driven by my love of music technology. That's what it's called, the Music Tech Guy thought. If you've got queries, want to ask questions about themes or issues I raise on this channel, please do. Put your comments into the comment section below the video, and I will try to address whatever issue it is you've raised or whatever question you've raised. If it's something to do with me making future videos in terms of how to do something on a particular piece of equipment I possess, please feel free to say that as well. I can't promise to make videos on all the requests I get, but I do have a jolly good go at making most of them. Around about here is the subscribe button. Again, to do with the YouTube and Google analytic process, the more subscribers the channel gets, the more the channel gets promoted, and the more people get to see the content that you have obviously just watched. If you want to see my latest video, it will be in one of these two boxes on this side of the screen. Also, there is a second box there, and that video will be chosen for you by YouTube based on your YouTube preferences. I look forward to the next time that we interact. And I do mean interact, because I always enjoy reading your comments back to me. But for now, bye-bye.